David Allan Coe built a career on defiance. He lived exactly the way he sang, loud, unfiltered, and without apology. But when the spotlight faded, the truth of his life became far darker than the outlaw image he wore on stage. Few people know what really happened to him after the fame slowed down, and even fewer have seen the private moments that reveal how quickly everything unraveled. Behind the mask, behind the rhinestones, and behind the reputation was a man whose life had been spiraling long before the world noticed. The final years of David Allan Coe were marked by isolation, financial loss, controversy, and a decline so unsettling that even his most devoted fans were left shocked. His ending wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, painful, and deeply tragic, exactly what he spent his whole life trying to outrun, born to break laws. David Allan Coe's life began in Akron, Ohio, on September 6, 1939, in a world that seemed stacked against him from the start. Akron was a hard-edged factory town, loud, unforgiving, and heavy with the kind of poverty that shaped entire families for generations. Coe grew up without stability, guidance, or the kind of support that might have steered him onto a different path. Even as a child, he carried a stubbornness and anger that adults didn't know how to manage, and by the age of 9, he had already crossed the line into trouble. That year, he was sent to a reform school, an institution known more for punishment than rehabilitation. Instead of correcting his behavior, it pushed him deeper into rebellion. Coe wasn't softened by the strict rules or harsh routines. He hardened. Throughout his teenage years, he moved in and out of juvenile detention centers, never staying long enough to change, yet staying long enough for the system to label him as a hopeless case. Teachers, social workers, and judges viewed him as a repeat offender. Coe, meanwhile, saw himself as someone who simply refused to be controlled. By his late teens and early 20s, the consequences intensified. He graduated from juvenile facilities to adult prisons, serving time for robbery, auto theft, and other crimes he rarely described publicly. These were high-security institutions, the kind filled with men who had long abandoned the idea of redemption. Coe spent years behind bars, surrounded by violence, isolation, and routines that slowly crush most people's spirit. But prison didn't break him. In a strange way, it clarified him. Locked away from the world, he was forced to confront a life defined by anger and survival. And somewhere inside those walls, something unexpected began. The first spark of music that would eventually carry him out of the prison system and into a world where his story, raw, painful, and unpolished, could finally be heard, songs behind bars. For most people, prison is the end of the road. For David Allan Coe, it was the beginning of the only road that ever truly belonged to him. By the time he reached his early 20s, he had already spent more time inside correctional institutions than outside. Adult prison wasn't just stricter, it was a different universe entirely. The routines were cold, the rules unyielding, and the environment full of men hardened by their own mistakes. Yet in this place of punishment, Coe discovered the one thing that gave him a sense of power: his voice. He started singing wherever he could, even when no one asked him to. On the yard, in echoing hallways, in the cramped, dim confines of his cell. His voice wasn't polished, but it was real, and inmates recognized that. Slowly, he began to build a reputation as the guy who could turn pain into something you could feel long after the sound faded. Everything changed when Coe crossed paths with Screamin' Jay Hawkins, who spent time performing for inmates and understood the kind of raw talent that can't be taught. Hawkins heard Coe sing and immediately understood that his voice carried more than melody. It carried a life story shaped by violence, fear, and survival. He urged Coe to start writing everything down: the memories, the anger, the betrayals, the loneliness. Hawkins believed those stories belonged in songs, not buried in silence. Coe listened. He began writing obsessively, filling page after page with lyrics drawn straight from his past. They weren't metaphors. They weren't fictional tales. They were confessions carved out of a life lived on the edge. And slowly, a transformation began. Music gave him direction, purpose, and a sense that he didn't have to remain defined by his criminal record. When Coe finally walked out of prison in 1967, he wasn't a changed man, but he was a man with something to say. With only a guitar, a few handwritten songs, and a dream that seemed impossible, he headed straight to the one place where he believed someone might listen. Nashville from inmate to Nashville reject. When David Allan Coe stepped out of prison in 1967, Nashville was the only destination that made sense. He had no home, no savings, and no connections, but he carried something that mattered more to him than comfort, a belief that his story could survive if he could just find the right ears. But Music City was not waiting for him with open arms. Nashville in the late 1960s was an industry built on order, predictability, and artists who looked safe and sounded safe. Everything about Coe screamed the opposite. He was an ex-convict with long hair, a rough voice, and a past that record executives considered a liability. Even worse, he refused to pretend to be someone he wasn't. That attitude impressed almost no one in the polished world of mainstream country. Without money for rent, Coe ended up living in a black hearse parked outside the Ryman Auditorium, the same building where the greatest country legends performed weekly. It was a surreal contrast. Inside, the clean-cut stars of the Grand Ole Opry. Outside, a man who had learned to survive in prison cells, now sleeping in a vehicle meant for funerals. Still, he practiced, wrote, and waited for someone to give him a chance. At first, everyone turned him down. Producers didn't like his voice. Publishers didn't like his image. Labels didn't like his unpredictability. Coe wasn't just rejected, he was dismissed outright. Many believed his music was too dark, too raw, too real for the public. That rejection lit a fire in him, and he kept pushing. Everything changed when Shelby Singleton heard him perform. Singleton, known for taking risks on unconventional artists, understood the authenticity in Coe's voice. He signed Coe to Plantation Records, leading to the release of Penitentiary Blues in 1970. The album didn't make Coe a star, but it opened a door that had stayed shut for years, and behind that door was a path that would lead him into the heart of the outlaw movement, whether Nashville liked it or not. Becoming the outlaw. For a while, David Allan Coe was known more for the songs he wrote than the songs he sang. Penitentiary Blues had earned him attention, but it didn't bring mainstream success. What changed his trajectory was his writing, raw, emotional, and carved out of real experience. In 1973, everything shifted when Tanya Tucker released Would You Lay With Me in a Field of Stone. At just 15, Tucker took Coe's haunting lyrics to #1, and suddenly the entire industry knew his name. But instead of bringing him fulfillment, the success reminded him that someone else was singing the story he lived. Coe didn't want to be a background figure. He didn't want to be just a songwriter. He wanted to stand on stage and deliver the truth himself. That opportunity arrived in the mid-1970s when he signed with Columbia Records. Unlike Nashville's more cautious labels, Columbia recognized that Coe's authenticity could become an asset, even if it came wrapped in controversy. In 1975, Coe released Once Upon a Rhyme, a record that showed a broader range than anyone expected, rebel swagger mixed with surprising vulnerability, and then came the turning point. You Never Even Called Me By My Name. Written by Steve Goodman and John Prine, the song was humorous and self-aware, poking fun at country cliches, but Coe made it unforgettable by adding a final verse that exaggerated every stereotype. Mama, trains, trucks, prison, and drinking. Fans loved it, radio stations played it, and for the first time, Coe stood at the center of his own success. But Coe didn't stop there. Inspired by Mel Tillis's rhinestone suits and by stories his father once told him, he reinvented himself as the mysterious rhinestone cowboy. He appeared on stage in glittering rhinestones and a Lone Ranger-style mask, creating a persona that was part rebel, part myth, and part shield. It wasn't just theatrics, it was protection. The mask hid a man shaped by trauma, rejection, and memories he never fully escaped. This new identity pushed him deeper into the outlaw movement, but it also pushed him toward the controversies that would soon define and nearly destroy his place in country music. Banned and unapologetic. By the late 1970s, David Allan Coe wasn't just part of the outlaw movement. He was redefining it in ways that made even other outlaws uncomfortable. While artists like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson pushed back against Nashville through sound and style, Coe pushed back through confrontation. And in 1976, long-haired Redneck made it clear that he saw himself as a man caught between worlds. Too wild for country purists and too country for the rock crowd, fans who felt misunderstood embraced the track. But it also solidified Coe as someone the industry viewed with caution. Then came the albums that changed everything. In 1978, Coe independently released Nothing Sacred, a record so explicit that no major label would touch it. It circulated through biker magazines and underground networks, spreading quickly but quietly. The songs were filled with graphic lyrics, offensive language, and material unlike anything country music had ever seen. In 1982, he followed it with Underground Album, doubling down on the controversy. The lyrics didn't just push boundaries, they shattered them. What Coe saw as storytelling, critics saw as unforgivable. The backlash was immediate and intense. Journalists labeled him racist, misogynistic, and vulgar. Radio stations banned his music entirely, not just the underground albums, but his mainstream work as well. Country music insiders publicly distanced themselves, and even artists who once admired his honesty now avoided being associated with him. These albums permanently altered Coe's reputation. To many listeners, they overshadowed everything else he had ever created. But Coe refused to apologize. He insisted that the songs were characters, snapshots of the world he grew up in, never personal endorsements. He pointed to the diversity of people he had lived alongside in prison and argued that the stories he told reflected environments few country singers had ever seen. Whether people believed him or not didn't change his stance. He wouldn't back down. Yet the consequences were real. As his public image collapsed, his finances began to crumble as well, and soon a mistake far more costly than bad publicity would push him into one of the most painful chapters of his life: the long fall. The late 1980s and early 1990s marked the beginning of a long, painful decline for David Allan Coe. His reputation had already taken heavy blows, but what came next cut far deeper. In 1984, crushed by debt and pressure from the IRS, he agreed to a deal that remains one of the most devastating financial losses in country music history. For just $225,000, Coe sold the publishing rights to every song he had written before that year, including Take This Job and Shove It, The Ride, and dozens of others that would go on to generate millions. It wasn't just a business mistake. It was the moment he lost ownership of the very stories that built his career. From that point forward, Coe had only one way to survive: constant touring. He began performing relentlessly, nearly 200 shows a year, moving from small clubs to biker rallies, from rural bars to fringe festivals. These weren't glamorous stages. They were places where fans didn't care about radio politics or industry backlash. They cared about the struggle in his voice, the pain in his lyrics, and the rawness that no record label could manufacture, but the lifestyle was harsh, the travel was exhausting, and the years of performing for survival slowly wore down both his body and his mind. Even so, Coe wasn't done reinventing himself. In the late 1990s, he surprised the music world by teaming up with members of Pantera, Dimebag Darrell, Vinnie Paul, and Rex Brown to create Rebel Meets Rebel, a metal country hybrid project unlike anything before it. After Dimebag's tragic death in 2004, the album was released in 2006, becoming one of Coe's most unexpected late-career statements. But behind the creativity, his health was fading. Respiratory issues, joint pain, and rumors of cognitive decline began to spread. Performances became unpredictable, sometimes brilliant, sometimes confused. Friends said he seemed tired, distant, and worn down by years of fighting battles he could never win. He made one last widely seen appearance in Johnny Cash's video God's Gonna Cut You Down, standing silently in black, looking like a ghost from the very world that created him. And after that, he drifted further from the spotlight, touring less, speaking less, and slowly disappearing into the shadows of his own legend. His final years were not glamorous. They were lonely, financially strained, and filled with the weight of everything he refused to outrun. David Allan Coe's life was chaotic, painful, and unforgettable. He never softened his edges, never apologized for who he was, and never stopped performing, even when his body and reputation were falling apart. His final years revealed a man shaped by loss, exhaustion, and the consequences of a lifetime spent fighting the world around him. But his music, for better or worse, still echoes with the honesty that made him impossible to ignore. What's the first David Allan Coe song you ever heard, or the one you think defines him the most? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another story from the darker side of music.